All right, everybody, let's talk about the real estate class that you're currently trying to partake in, and one of everybody's most terrifying topics, the math. Before you get started with any of the real estate math, you do have to understand some basic mathematical concepts. Really and truthfully, most of the math follows kind of the same formulas, and if you understand addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and percentages, you'll be able to do just about every math in the real estate class. There is one word that I'm going to drop into the mix here that will probably make you throw up in your mouth a little bit, but hear me out. The word is algebra. I know, you probably just panicked really, really bad. But I'm going to show you some of the basic mathematical functions, work you through a math packet to help you understand the flow and the logic. Now, the reason I bring up algebra, there is a very big component that is taught in most pre-licensing curriculums and even post-licensing curriculums sometimes for real estate math. And that is the use of something called a T-bar. Now, I'm going to get more into the T-bar in just a second. The T-bar, though, is really and truthfully a visual representation of basic algebraic function. In other words, getting everything on one side of the equation for a linear equation is the same thing as what we're going to ask you to do with a T-bar. So I'm going to try to explain both ways. If you prefer the T-bar, there's other videos that heavily focus on that, and some of the instructors like to go that way. Personally, I like the linear equation method better because if I'm being honest, it doesn't really require you to memorize any formulas throughout this class. You'll use logic and sequence versus formulaic memorization. You'll see what I mean in just a second. Now first, let's talk about a few things. Let me get my calculator pulled up here. Okay, so I've got my calculator pulled up. Of course, the addition, subtraction should be pretty straightforward. Hopefully, multiplication and division should also be somewhat straightforward as well. One of the things I want to take a moment to do is to talk about percentages. Folks, I want you to think of percentages as a dollar. If we said 50% of something, okay, that would be reflected as 50 and then the percent sign. Now, when we say 50% in this percent sign, we will have you use the calculator in some instances, and you hit the percent sign and it will actually do a conversion for you. Unfortunately, 50% isn't really a number so much as it is a function. And so if I said 50% of a dollar, well, there's $1, but half of a dollar is 50 cents. So you can always basically just think of it as cents. When I say percent, think cents. So 50% would be reflected as 50 cents. If I said 25%, that would be reflected as 25 cents because of the way that it correlates to a decimal. So if I said, 300 times 17%, well, what you're really saying is 300 times 0.17, and that will give you the percentage. So in this case, if I pull up my calculator, 300 times 0.17 would be 51, and so my calculator keeps hiding away here, so I'll keep pulling it back up. And so you can use the calculator function to do this as well, and so you could say 300 times 17 and then hit the percent button and it will convert it for you. I do not care which way you go about this, just as long as you're comfortable with these conversions. Use the calculator function with the percent button or just think cents, okay? Anytime you see the word percent, it's just like saying cents. 75% is 0.75, exactly how you would write out 75 cents. So there's example number one, there's consideration number one for making this math a little bit easier. So now that we've talked about the percentages, let's talk about fractions for a second because that's another area where people have a tendency to struggle. Fractions, for all intents and purposes, are just an equation of themselves. So if I was to say 1/2 or 1/2, you've got the numerator, which is the top number. You've got the denominator, which is the bottom number. And so fractions are very hard to work with. So the way that you get around that is you convert them also to a decimal. So I want you to think of this line right here as a division symbol. So if I wanted to say 1/2 as a, let me pull my calculator back up here, as a decimal, you would just take the 1 divided by 2. So it's the same thing as saying 50% or 0.5. Same thing too, if we look at another fraction. If I said 3/4, well, that's very hard to work with, and so all you have to do is just do the same thing. 3 divided by 4. It's the same as saying 0.75. Just some basic tips on percentages and fractions to be aware of as you dive into the math to make your life a little bit easier. The reason why this will come into play is when we get to things like mill rates. You will see something like 13 and 7/8 mils. Don't overthink that. If we had 13 and 7/8, what that's really saying is 13 and some type of decimal. So all you have to do is consider the whole number 13 and then treat the fractions separately to get the decimal. So in this case, 7 divided by 8. This would be the same thing as saying 13.875 mils. Now we'll explain mils more later. Don't panic. I just wanted to talk about some basic math. So let's talk about another concept here. I want to talk about the t-bars and linear equations. Folks, I said the word algebra earlier, and I told you algebra is such a scary word to so many people. Please understand that when I say algebra, I mean the most simplistic form of algebra. So algebra was a situation where you tried to find the value of an unknown variable. That's where letters came into play here. And so when we're dealing with a basic mathematical equation, okay, let's just talk about percentages as we've been talking about. If I said a house sold for or was being purchased for $400,000 and that somebody was purchasing a home and getting an 80% loan. Well, there's that percentages again. 80% think cents. So times 0.8, right? That's 80%. And we can figure out what the loan amount was. So in this case, we've got, move this off to the side, 400,000 times 0.8, which would give us a loan amount of $320,000. Well, algebra comes into play here because if we were dealing with a scenario and we were missing one of these variables, you can think linearly. And then all you have to do is put it in a format you're comfortable with and then rearrange it. Let me give you an example. If I change something here and I said, okay, well, let me get my eraser. If I said that you were purchasing a home for $400,000 and you borrowed $320,000 and I asked you to tell me what the loan to value ratio was, it's not something that your brain is typically going to be able to just do. But if you realize that a loan to value is a percentage, all you have to really say is, okay, well, 400,000 times what equals $320,000? Well, instead of saying what, algebra is us coming in and saying, let's just say R, right? Give it a variable. 400,000 times the rate equals $320,000. And so all algebra was getting everything from one side to the other so that you're left with only this unknown variable on one side. And so think about it. If you do something on one side, you just do it on the other side to match it. You know, this may be something that requires a little more videos and training on to get comfortable with the algebra. But this is just one way to do it. I'm telling you, this is the way where you will never need a t-bar. You'll never have to remember any formulas because you're just using what your brain already thinks of as a linear progression for a real estate equation of percentages. So in this case, 400,000 times R gives us 320. Well, if we were to divide by 400,000 on this side, we would have to do the same on this side, right? Divide by 400,000 on this side. And watch what happens. That negates itself out. So now you're just left with R. So now your loan to value ratio, where we gave this variable of R, equals 320,000 divided by 400. So if I take this 320,000 and divide it by 400,000, that gives us an 80% loan to value ratio. This is all T-bars are. So when you hear somebody talk about a T-bar, they will take the T, and this is the whole, this is the rate, and this is the part. So in the example we just did, if I said you purchased it for 400,000 times 0.8, it would give us 320. And so you still have to have this same kind of mental progression of this linear format, but what this does is this gives you a visual of when to multiply and divide. Because if I take away one of these, right, if you're going across the t, you are multiplying. If you're going down, you're dividing. So in this instance, I took away, just like we did on the linear side, the rate. And so because we've got the whole, we've got this missing piece, which is the rate, and we've got the part, we would know because we're going down the t, we're dividing. And so it would be like saying, yet again, 320,000 divided by 400,000 gives us our missing piece here. That's all a t-bar is a visual representation of how to do linear equations. So I will show you multiple ways to do it throughout the math video that you're currently watching. We'll take a look at examples. I'll show you how to do it as a linear equation, show you how to do it plugged in as a t-bar, and you pick whichever way you're more comfortable with. Personally, I like the linear equations. A lot of people who hate the word algebra will prefer the t-bars. So